For most of human history, you didn't pay taxes with coins. You paid with your back, your hands, your years. Before governments could print money or track bank accounts, they had one resource they could extract reliably: human bodies. And they used it relentlessly. Egyptian farmers spent months dragging stone blocks they would never see finished. Incan laborers carved roads through the Andes, not for wages, but because the state demanded their time. Russian serfs worked their lord's fields 6 days a week, keeping the seventh for their own survival. They weren't slaves. They were taxpayers. And millions of them died paying it. Welcome to Historian Pulse, where money, power, and history collide. Here's what most people get wrong about the ancient world. They assume primitive economies meant primitive thinking. That labor taxes were a crude system used by rulers who hadn't figured out money yet. The opposite is true. Labor taxation was elegant. In a world where coins didn't exist or barely circulated, human energy was the most reliable store of value. Every empire that understood this became unstoppable. Start with Egypt. Around 2600 BC, Pharaoh Khufu needed a tomb. Not a modest one. The Great Pyramid of Giza. 2.3 million stone blocks. 20 years of construction. And the workforce? Not slaves. That's a myth that has been debunked repeatedly by modern archaeology. The laborers were Egyptian farmers conscripted during the Nile's flood season, when their fields were underwater and their hands were idle. They owed the pharaoh weeks of labor every year. This was their tax. They built one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and received bread, beer, and onions as compensation. Rome perfected the model differently. Citizens owed the state munera, compulsory public services, road construction, bridge building, aqueduct maintenance. Rome's famous road network stretched over 250,000 miles across 3 continents. The legions got the credit. But ordinary citizens, freedmen, and conquered populations laid most of those stones, unpaid, under obligation. Then there's China. The Qin dynasty conscripted hundreds of thousands of laborers to build the Great Wall beginning around 221 BC. The Grand Canal, stretching over 1,100 miles, was built under the Sui dynasty with an estimated workforce of over 5 million conscripted peasants. Contemporary accounts describe workers collapsing from exhaustion. Tens of thousands never came home. Here's the counterintuitive part. Every monument we celebrate as a triumph of civilization, the pyramids, the roads, the walls, the canals, was built by people who had no choice. They weren't volunteers. They weren't employees. They were citizens settling a debt they never agreed to. The most iconic achievements of the ancient world weren't funded by treasuries. They were funded by human spines. And as long as empires kept growing, nobody questioned whether the cost was worth it. Until one empire turned this system into something far worse. The Inca Empire had no currency, no markets, no written language. And yet it ran one of the most sophisticated economies the world has ever seen. The secret was a system called mida. Every adult in the Inca Empire owed a portion of their labor to the state. It was rotational. A few months building roads. A season farming state-owned land. A stint weaving textiles or serving in the military. In return, and this part matters, the state guaranteed food, shelter, clothing, and community welfare. Nobody starved, nobody was abandoned. The meta was demanding, but it was reciprocal. A social contract written in sweat rather than ink. Then the Spanish arrived. In 1545, a local herder named Diego Walpa reportedly discovered silver on a mountain called Cerro Rico in what is now Potosí, Bolivia. Within decades, Potosí became the largest source of silver on Earth. By 1600, its population rivaled that of London and Paris. Spain needed labor to extract that silver. So they borrowed the Inca system. They kept the name, called it meta. But they gutted everything that made it work. The reciprocity vanished. Indigenous men, some as young as 14, were marched hundreds of miles from their villages to work underground. Shifts lasted 12 to 16 hours in tunnels so narrow men crawled on their stomachs. Mercury, used to process silver ore, poisoned their lungs and nervous systems. Caverns buried workers alive. Many entered the mines and never saw daylight again. The scale of death was staggering. Historians estimate that between the 1540s and early 1800s, approximately 8 million indigenous and African laborers perished in and around Potosí. 8 million. For context, that exceeds the entire population of some European nations at the time. And the silver? It funded the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. It financed wars across Europe. It flooded Asian markets and reshaped global trade for 2 centuries. The modern world economy was arguably born in those tunnels. Nothing is ever as simple as it looks. The same system that sustained one of the most equitable empires in history was hollowed out, weaponized, and turned into a machine of mass death. The name survived. The soul didn't, and Spain was far from the last to play this trick. There's a comfortable myth that forced labor taxation was an ancient problem. Something buried in pyramids and silver mines. A relic of less enlightened times. The truth is uglier. Labor taxation didn't fade with the ancient world. It intensified in the modern one. Start with medieval Europe. Under feudalism, serfs owed their lords 2 to 4 days of unpaid labor every week. They plowed fields they would never harvest. Built walls they would never shelter behind. They couldn't leave. They couldn't refuse. This wasn't employment. It was extraction, dressed in the language of duty and divine order. France took it further. The corvée royale forced peasants to build and maintain the kingdom's roads, unpaid, for weeks at a time. The nobility, completely exempt. A peasant farmer could be dragged from his own harvest to lay stones on a highway he'd never use, while the aristocrat whose carriage rolled over it owed nothing. By 1789, this system had become one of the sharpest grievances fueling the French Revolution. The roads were pristine. The people who built them were starving. Russia was worse. Under Barshina, serfs worked their landlords' estates up to 6 days per week, keeping only 1 day, usually Sunday, for their own survival. Russian serfdom wasn't abolished until 1861, 2 years before the Emancipation Proclamation in America. Let that sink in. But nothing compares to what happened in the Congo. In 1885, King Leopold II of Belgium claimed the Congo Free State as his personal property. Not Belgium's, his. He imposed rubber quotas on Congolese villages. Every community owed a set amount of harvested rubber. Failure meant punishment. And punishment meant mutilation. Leopold's soldiers collected severed hands from men, women, and children as proof that discipline had been enforced. Baskets of hands. Photographed. Documented. Undeniable. An estimated 10 million Congolese died under Leopold's system between 1885 and 1908. That pattern should feel uncomfortably familiar. Egypt demanded labor and gave bread. The Incas demanded labor and gave security. Leopold demanded labor and gave machetes. The evolution wasn't toward freedom. It was toward cruelty without pretense. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. It still hasn't fully stopped. Most people believe forced labor taxation ended somewhere in the 19th century. Abolished alongside slavery. Buried by industrialization. Replaced by modern income tax systems that feel clean and civilized. That belief is wrong. Colonial powers didn't abandon labor taxation. They repackaged it. In British East Africa, the Crown imposed hut taxes and head taxes on indigenous populations starting in the 1890s. The taxes were denominated in currency. But here's the catch. These communities had no money economy. The only way to earn the coins the British demanded was to leave your village and work on European-owned plantations, railways, or mines. The choice was technically free. The outcome was functionally identical to conscription. You either labored for the empire or watched your home get seized. France did the same across West Africa. Portugal did it in Mozambique. The mechanism changed. The principle didn't. Then there's conscription, the most normalized labor tax in modern history. The draft is, at its core, the state claiming your body for its purposes. France built Napoleon's empire on it. Prussia perfected it. The United States used it through 2 world wars, Korea and Vietnam. Over 2.2 million Americans were drafted during Vietnam alone. The U.S. draft wasn't fully ended until 1973. Young men paid their tax not in dollars but in years, trauma, and for over 58,000 of them, their lives. And today? The International Labor Organization estimated in 2021 that 27.6 million people worldwide remain trapped in forced labor. State-imposed compulsory labor persists in North Korea, Eritrea, and Myanmar. Eritrean national service, technically military conscription, can last indefinitely. Some conscripts have served over 20 years, without pay, without a discharge date, without a choice. Here's the reframe most people aren't ready for. Even modern income taxation is a claim on your labor. You work 40 hours. The government takes a percentage of what those hours produced. You don't carry stones, you don't crawl through mines. But the underlying transaction is ancient. The state takes a portion of your time and energy, and you comply because the alternative is punishment. The tax was never really about money. It was always about control over human time. From the floodplains of Egypt to the silver mines of Potosí. From the rubber fields of Congo to the draft offices of Washington. For 5,000 years, the most common tax in human history was never paid in coins. It was paid in bodies, in years, in lives that never came home. We tell ourselves that era is over, that modern systems are different, cleaner, more humane. But 27.6 million people in forced labor today would disagree. And every paycheck you open, with the government's cut already taken, carries a faint echo of something very, very old. The mechanism evolved, the principle never did. History has the answers. Subscribe to Historian Pulse.